They say money does not change a person. It only shows who they truly were all along. Those were the words old Mama Ebun whispered the day Adaeze left her father's crumbling compound in Enugu to chase a new life in Lagos. The wind carried the smell of wet earth and roasted corn, and Adaeze's heart, though young and hopeful, carried a quiet ache she couldn't name. She had grown up believing kindness was a kind of wealth, and love was worth more than gold. But Lagos, she would learn, had a different way of teaching lessons. Adaeze was not born into wealth. Her mother had died young, and her father, once a proud teacher, had aged quickly under the weight of unpaid salaries and hunger. She had learned to live with little but dignity. When she moved to Lagos, she carried 2 suitcases, a certificate in accounting, and a head full of dreams. She found work as a junior clerk at a small firm in Surulere and rented a single room where the walls sweated at night. But even in her hardship, she was known for her gentle smile, her neat appearance, and her quiet strength. Then came Tunde, tall, confident, and sharp-tongued, a man whose perfume spoke louder than his words. He worked at a construction company in Victoria Island and always dressed like a man who expected to be seen. The first day he noticed Adaeze was at the bus stop near Ojuelegba, where he offered her a ride in his air-conditioned car. She refused politely, but the next day, when the rain fell without mercy, she accepted. That was the beginning. He made her laugh, called her queen, and told her she deserved more than what life had given her. And slowly, she began to believe him. He met her father in Enugu, promised to take care of her, and they married in a modest ceremony. The photos showed 2 people smiling, one in love, the other in ambition. Their life in Lagos began simply. They rented a small flat in Yaba, and Adaeze cooked with joy, packed Tunde's lunch, and saved every naira she could. She believed in building slowly. But as Tunde's company grew, so did his pride. He began to speak differently, laugh at things that once mattered, and look at Adaeze as though her simplicity embarrassed him. When he was promoted and moved his office to Abuja, he changed completely. Abuja polished his voice, his wardrobe, and his ego. He started keeping late nights, attending parties filled with the city's glittering crowd, oil men, politicians, and women whose laughter smelled of champagne. Adaeze followed him to Abuja, leaving behind the little stability she had built in Lagos. Their new house in Maitama was big, cold, and filled with silence. The housekeeper and driver called her Madam, but her husband barely called her anything at all. One night she cooked his favorite egusi soup and waited till midnight. When he arrived, his shirt reeked of perfume that wasn't hers. "You shouldn't have waited," he said, not looking at her. "Women who wait always end up tired." It was then Adaeze realized love could die quietly, not with shouting, but with indifference. She tried to pray it away. Every morning she knelt beside the bed and asked God to make Tunde remember the man he used to be. But God's timing, she knew, was never rushed. In the meantime, the gossip began. Neighbors whispered about Tunde's new companion, a socialite named Amara, beautiful, bold, and rich. Adaeze tried to ignore it until one afternoon when she attended a charity event in Wuza. She saw them. Tunde, laughing freely, holding Amara's hand as cameras flashed. He introduced Amara as his business partner, but his eyes told another story. When Adaeze approached, he barely acknowledged her. "You should have stayed home," he muttered under his breath. That night, she cried till dawn. Her father called, but she lied, said she was fine. "Marriage is not easy, Papa," she said softly. He replied, "My daughter, peace is better than a mansion built on pride." But pride was all Tunde had left. He began to mock her more openly. When guests visited, he called her local. He laughed at her accent, her head tie, her cooking. One evening, he said before his friends, "My wife still shops in Balogun like a market woman. Imagine." They laughed. Adaeze smiled weakly, holding her tears like fragile glass. Then came the day that broke her heart completely. Tunde threw a lavish birthday party for Amara in their home, the same home Adaeze had once scrubbed with her hands. She wasn't invited, but she came downstairs when the music grew too loud. Amara wore diamonds that could feed a village. Tunde stood beside her, glass in hand, smiling proudly. When Adaeze appeared, the crowd went silent. Tunde turned, eyes sharp as a knife. "What are you doing here?" "This is my house," she replied, voice trembling. He laughed. "Your house? You mean our house. Don't embarrass yourself." Amara chuckled softly. "Tunde, please, let her be. She looks tired." Laughter followed, the cruel kind that sticks to the skin. Adaeze turned away, but Tunde's next words froze her in place. "Some women don't know when to stop acting like beggars. You married me when you had nothing. Remember that before you open your mouth." The laughter grew louder. Adaeze stood still, her dignity bleeding quietly into the floor. She wanted to scream, but something inside her broke, the kind of break that doesn't make a sound. That night, she packed her things and left before dawn. She didn't take much, just a few clothes, her wedding ring, and the envelope her late father had once told her never to open until the day your heart becomes heavier than your tears. She didn't understand his words then, but she understood them now. Inside that envelope lay a letter and a key. She left Abuja before the sun could lay its full hand on the rooftops, the suitcase light, the air cool with the smell of harmattan dust and jacaranda. In the back seat of the taxi to the airport, she held the brown envelope the way a mother might hold a sleeping child, careful not to wake what she could not yet carry. Her phone vibrated with messages she did not open, one from the housekeeper asking if she'd be home for lunch, another from a friend who had seen a video clip of last night's party on someone's Instagram story. You could hear the laughter in the background, bright and unkind, the kind that stains. When the plane lifted, Lagos gathered itself in her memory like an old friend who had waited patiently. The crowded markets of Yaba, the hawkers whose voices came like drums, the salt on the air near Ahmadu Bello Way. In that space between departure and arrival, Adaeze felt the ache of a promise she had made to herself as a girl, to stay kind, even when the world laughed. She pressed the envelope to her chest and whispered, "Papa, if this is your final counsel, give me the strength to bear it." The clouds parted. Below, the city glimmered as if God had poured light into its wounds. Back in Enugu, the compound had not changed its posture. The guava tree still leaned into the yard like a friendly gossip, and the paint on the front steps still peeled in thin tongues. Her father had been buried 6 months earlier, yet his presence walked beside her with that calm, teacherly patience he wore like a cardigan. Inside her old room, she placed the envelope on the table, washed her face, and tied her scarf tighter as if bracing her mind. She sat, breathed, and slit the top with a small blade. The letter smelled faintly of camphor and old memories. "My daughter," it began in his careful handwriting, the loops generous, the lines steady. "I did not keep this from you because I doubted your strength. I kept it until the day I feared your gentleness could be harmed beyond repair. If your eyes are reading this, it means that day has come. Forgive me for my delay, and trust me for what I now place in your hands." The key taped to the bottom gleamed like a quiet secret. Beneath it, a note listed an address in Ikoyi and the name of a trustee firm. At the end, a single line, "Your mother had a name before she took mine, and her name carried a river with it." She traveled to Lagos by road, preferring the long ribbon of highway to prepare her heart. The land changed slowly, orange earth, small towns with suya smoke rising in gentle spirals, women balancing basins of oranges and groundnuts like crowns. At Onitsha, she remembered her mother's laugh. Somewhere near Benin, she remembered the way her father hummed hymns while counting out school fees for neighbors who had none. By the time she crossed into Lagos, the city greeted her with hawkers pressing pure water against windows and conductors calling destinations as if bargaining with fate. The trustee office in Ikoyi sat behind glass and quiet, the kind of place where air conditioners spoke in whispers and the reception desk smiled without touching you. She presented the letter and the key. A senior partner, Barrister Ifeoma Nwosu. A woman with the measured gaze of someone who had seen both wealth and the damage it could do, studied the documents and led Adaeze to a small room with a safety deposit box built into the wall. The key turned with an almost ceremonial ease. Inside lay a thick folder, a flash drive, and a velvet pouch whose weight startled her. Ifeoma gestured. "Take your time, madam. There is history here." The folder told a story Adaeze had never been taught. Her mother's father, Chief Arinze, had founded a logistics company at the dawn of the oil boom, not one of those headlines and helicopters empires, but a network of ports, inland depots, and cold chain trucks that fed markets and hospitals from Apapa to Jabi. He had been a quiet man who distrusted loudness. A family quarrel had parceled his children into distant rooms, and her mother, the youngest, had chosen a teacher over a tycoon, an act that had angered the old man, and then, with the slow work of regret, softened him. Before his death, he placed a controlling stake in a blind trust for the child of his gentle daughter, with strict instructions that the trustees would reveal it only when certain conditions were met. The heir had to be of age, employed for at least 3 years in any honest work, and, the line made Adaeze sit straighter, shielded from the destructive appetites of those who value a person for gold rather than goodness. Ifeoma's voice flowed over the dates and signatures. "The trust has grown, madam, through acquisitions, prudent dividends, and expansion into West African corridors. The consolidated valuation last quarter was substantial." She named a number that sounded like thunder hidden in a polite room. Not liquid cash, but ownership. Equity in a living tree of companies. Terminals, rails, warehouses, a fintech payments arm that had sprouted to serve the drivers and vendors. The velvet pouch contained a mother-of-pearl rosary and a gold bangle engraved simply, "To the child who chooses kindness." For a long while, Adaeze did not speak. A wind passed through her chest and left it strangely still. The money itself tugged at no part of her soul. It was the knowledge that her mother, whom she had learned mostly through memory, had been a bridge between worlds, and that her father had protected that bridge at great cost, holding the truth like a lantern until the night demanded light. When she finally found her voice, it was steady. "What do I do now?" Ifeoma looked at her, not as a lawyer, but as a sister might. "We do not announce anything yet. Ownership is power, and power attracts noise. We will transition your position quietly. We will secure your personal accounts. We will put walls where walls are needed. You, meanwhile, must decide the kind of woman you want this inheritance to reveal." The words landed like a blessing and a test. Adaeze nodded. "I want to remain the same, only stronger." Ifeoma allowed herself a small smile. "Then we will proceed." Outside, the Ikoyi sun fell through palm fronds, writing slow, golden sentences on the pavement, as if Lagos itself were practicing a softer language. News of her departure reached Tunde long before any whisper of what she had found. He called twice, a brittle, "Where are you?" and a second call with more thunder than concern. She did not answer. He sent a message to the driver to bring her back by evening. The driver, who had watched the slow bruises indifference leaves, deleted it quietly. In Abuja, the world Tunde had courted continued to shine on him. Lunches at Transcorp, meetings where men traded contracts with smiles that never reached their eyes, and night hours blurred by music and the sweet perfume of a woman who believed she could teach him to be new. Amara liked to say, half joking, "We must polish you, darling. Abuja is no place for rough edges." He swallowed the compliment like a pill that promised light. With Adaeze gone, he moved louder. He withdrew money from their joint account, sold 2 pieces of furniture she had chosen, and hosted a small gathering to celebrate a new tender. Someone played the clip from the birthday party again. Laughter washed the room, and he let it. Yet that night, when he stood before the bathroom mirror, he caught a kind of emptiness crouching at the edges of his smile. He pushed it away, the way you push away small truths before they grow teeth. On the day the trustees finalized the first step, the quiet registration of her majority position and the protective cordon around her personal life, Lagos tested Adaeze with its everyday theater. A danfo splashed muddy water onto her dress near Falomo, a hawker caught his crate before it scattered oranges onto the road, and a small boy with dust on his cheeks offered to clean her shoes with tissue pulled from somewhere. She paid him, watched him work with reverence, and saw the pride in his small bow when he finished. She thought of the warehouses that now hummed beneath her name, the drivers who relied on the depots, the nurses waiting for cold chain vaccines not to fail, and she made a prayer so simple it lightened her shoulders. Let me never forget who is truly rich. That afternoon, she called Ifeoma. I want to visit Papa quietly, she said. I want to see the tree my grandfather planted, with my own eyes. They went at dusk, when the port's music lowered to a sturdier rhythm, cranes sighing, ropes speaking in salt, men in reflective vests moving like dancers who understood weight. No one knew who she was. She watched, asked questions, greeted people properly, and felt a new kind of authority arrive without noise. Responsibility, not performance. Ifeoma's voice came softly beside her. This is the kind of wealth that does not clap for itself. It simply feeds. In Abuja, the season of performance began to turn. A subcontractor called Tunde about a delay in payments. He shouted without listening. A minor news blog questioned the environmental plan of the project he was fronting. He sent a text to a friend in PR to handle it. Amara, smelling trouble she could not name, suggested a weekend in Dubai. Just to breathe. He agreed, eager to step onto a plane the way some men step into new skins. At the airport lounge, however, his card declined in that small, humiliating way machines choose. No drama, just a soft refusal that feels like a slap in a crowded room. He laughed too loudly, pretended it was a bank error, called his account officer with irritation, and blamed network. The officer spoke gently. Sir, your spending limit was adjusted pending certain verifications. He demanded to know by whom. The answer did not come. He bought the tickets with another card, but the bruise had formed. On the flight, he looked out at the dark space between clouds and felt, for the first time, that Abuja's applause could not drown the sound of something falling through his life. When they landed, Amara breezed through duty-free in a river of perfume. He stood still, thumb hovering over Adaeze's contact, a name he had not called as a plea in years. He put the phone away. Pride has a voice that says, "Not yet." He obeyed it, not knowing that pride never pays interest. It only collects. 2 months passed before Lagos sent for Tunde. It wasn't a letter, not even a call, just a rumor that traveled through men who owed other men and reached him like an echo. The board wants to meet the Abuja representative. He didn't question it. Meetings were oxygen to him. He flew in the night before, confident, a suit pressed sharp enough to cut silence. When he entered the boardroom in Ikoyi, the air smelled of polished wood and quiet authority. Across the long table sat faces he had never seen, executives, auditors, a few lawyers. He recognized one, Barrister Ifeoma. She gave him the briefest nod, the kind that says, "We've met destiny before. Let's not pretend it's new." He was asked to sit. He smiled, adjusted his tie. "Gentlemen, good morning. I hope we can get through this quickly. I have another meeting in my Tama by 4. A man at the far end cleared his throat. "Mr. Tunde Adebayo, You're here because of recent discrepancies found in project accounts linked to A2 Logistics and its affiliates. We're investigating fraudulent diversions of contract funds. Tunde's confidence didn't falter. Not yet. There must be some mistake. My company has no direct connection to A2 Logistics. Ifeoma slid a file across the table. You registered as intermediary consultant. Payments from government subcontracts passed through your firm's account. Tunde's smile thinned. Consulting is not fraud, madam. No, she replied calmly. But inflating invoices, forging authorizations, and diverting fuel supply funds are. The silence that followed was heavy enough to bend the air. Then the door opened, and she walked in. Adaeze, in a cream Ankara gown that flowed like calm water, her hair braided neatly, a quiet grace around her that made the room instinctively soften. Her face carried no anger, no triumph, just a stillness that spoke of someone who had seen fire and learned to walk through it without burning. For the first time, Tunde's body betrayed him. His throat tightened, hands cold. Adaeze, he whispered. She didn't speak immediately. She placed a folder on the table beside Ifeoma's. Gentlemen, she began, voice steady. As the majority shareholder of Noli Holdings, which owns A2 Logistics, I was asked to review internal financial patterns. Some names stood out. His was one. She looked at him then, not as a wife looks at a husband, but as truth looks at a lie that has run out of excuses. He tried to laugh. Majority what? Ifeoma leaned forward. Your wife, sir, Mrs. Adaeze Noli Adebayo, inherited controlling interest in this conglomerate. You, in essence, stole from her company. A ripple of whispers traveled through the room. Tunde stared at Adaeze, disbelief twisting his face. This is a setup. You? How? You're nothing. Enough, she said softly, and in that word he heard something final, the closing of a door he could never reopen. She turned to the board. I won't press criminal charges. Let him return what he took and walk away quietly. Let this end with dignity, if there's any left. Tunde sank back, the realization dawning that the woman he mocked before strangers now sat in judgment over his destiny. He looked at her, not her beauty, but the strength he'd ignored. After the meeting, the hall outside hummed with whispers and pity. Tunde followed her out. Adaeze, please, he said, voice cracking. I didn't know. I was stupid. I thought you... She turned to him, eyes shining with quiet sorrow. You thought wealth defined a person. Now you know it doesn't. He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. There was a time when I would have given my life to protect your pride. Now I protect my peace. She walked away, her heels echoing softly down the marble corridor. Tunde stood still, tears threatening but too proud to fall. The security guard opened the door for her, and the afternoon light wrapped her in gold. For a moment, he remembered the small Yaba apartment, the laughter, the smell of egusi soup, her voice calling his name in prayer. Then the memory turned to ash. He left Lagos that night a smaller man. Amara, ever watchful of storms, had already drifted toward a new promise in the city's elite circles. The world that once called his name now pretended not to hear. Adaeze returned to Enugu weeks later to visit her mother's grave. She carried white lilies, the kind her mother loved. She knelt, pressing her palm against the soil. Mama, she whispered, you taught me to be kind, even when kindness hurt. I almost lost that lesson, but it found me again. The wind rose softly, as if answering her. When she returned to Lagos, her days took on a calm rhythm. She visited the company sites, launched a scholarship program in her parents' names, and made it a rule that every driver in their fleet receive health coverage. She refused to buy mansions or throw parties. She preferred the quiet satisfaction of purpose. Sometimes at night, she sat by her balcony, watching the city's lights blink like restless souls. She thought of the proverb Mama Eben once told her, The heart that stays kind will never remain poor forever. She understood it now. Wealth was not what filled your account. It was what filled your heart after life had emptied it. And in that quiet, with the city breathing below her, Adaeze smiled. Not because she had won, but because she had remained herself. Years later, the story of Adaeze Noli Adebayo became one of those whispered tales that Lagos keeps in its chest, told by househelps in markets, by drivers stuck in traffic, by mothers warning their daughters never to forget themselves when love turns loud. The details changed each time, but the moral remained that humility can carry a crown and pride can die thirsty even beside a river. Adaeze rarely spoke of the past. She had learned that healing was not forgetting, but remembering without pain. Her life had settled into rhythm. Mornings began with soft gospel songs drifting from the radio, the smell of hibiscus tea filling the kitchen, and the laughter of children from the neighborhood school nearby. She had turned one of her late grandfather's warehouses into a training center for young women, teaching bookkeeping, trade logistics, and basic finance. "So no man will ever tell you your value is measured by what he gives," she would say, smiling. They called her Madame Adaeze, the gentle lioness. Gentle because her voice never rose, lioness because her presence carried a quiet authority that made even arrogance bow its head. On Sundays, she drove to church alone. No convoy, no noise. The ushers still greeted her with surprise. Billionaires in Lagos rarely queued like everyone else. But she would wave her turn, hold children's hands, and whisper to the widows who sat at the back, "God still writes stories in dust." After service, she would visit the old woman who sold roasted plantain by the gate, buy from her even when she wasn't hungry, and ask about her grandchildren. It was the small gestures that anchored her to who she had always been. Tunde's name surfaced again only in fragments. Someone said he had gone into debt after trying to start a construction firm in Ghana. Another said Amara had left him for a politician. There were rumors of illness, of a brief arrest, of nights spent drinking in small bars where no one remembered his glory days. Adaeze heard all of it the way one listens to distant thunder, with awareness but without fear. One evening, while reviewing files in her office, her secretary entered. "Madam, there's a man outside. He says his name is Mr. Tunde. He's been waiting since morning." For a moment, her hands froze. Then she nodded. "Let him in." He entered slowly, thinner, older, the shine gone from his once proud eyes. His suit hung loosely, his confidence replaced by something fragile. When he spoke, his voice trembled. "Adaeze, I didn't know where else to go." She gestured for him to sit. "How have you been?" she asked softly. He laughed without humor. "Alive. Barely. I came to apologize, though I know it changes nothing." He swallowed hard. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me. And I destroyed it because I thought wealth was louder than love." For a long while she said nothing. Then she looked at him the way rain looks at dry earth. "Tunde, we both learned. You lost me to pride. I found myself through pain. We can call it balance." She stood, poured him a glass of water, and handed it to him with steady hands. He took it like a man receiving communion. "I don't deserve your kindness," he whispered. "Perhaps not," she said, "but grace is never deserved. That's why it heals." He nodded, tears finally escaping the prison of his pride. Before he left, she gave him an envelope, not filled with money, but a letter of reference for a training position at one of their regional depots. "Start again," she said. "Work with your hands. Dignity will follow." That night, Adaeze sat by her balcony again, watching the moon pull silver lines across the lagoon. The city murmured below, horns, laughter, generators, the endless song of survival. She thought of her parents, of how her father had trusted goodness over wealth, and how that goodness had found her again when everything else fell away. A cool breeze touched her cheek like a benediction. She closed her eyes and whispered, "God may delay, but he never forgets." Somewhere in the distance, the call to prayer rose and fell, blending with the hum of Lagos. The stars leaned closer, as if listening. And the story, her story, settled into the heart of the night, a living proverb carved in light. The heart that stays kind will never remain poor forever.